world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to Rebank, a visionary podcast about banking, fintech, and the future. The future of banking is here.
Hello and welcome to Rebank. I'm your host, Will Beeson. Richard Gendal Brown is the CTO of R3, an enterprise blockchain company backed by a number of high-profile strategic investors. R3 has been working on its Corda platform since the early days of blockchain mania, and is now actively supporting projects and implementations in syndicated lending, trade settlement, supply chain management, and more. In this conversation, Richard reconciles the early hype around blockchain with the current meaningful real-world implementations and describes where early adopters are planning to take the technology. For all of our past episodes and to sign up to our newsletter, please visit bankingthefuture.com. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please welcome Richard Gendal Brown.
Richard Gendal Brown, welcome to Rebank.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to connect with you. We're here at a massive conference that you guys are running in London. I think you said something like 1,000 people were here yesterday, focused on the development side of the R3 Corda world, right?
That's right. So it's the middle of CordaCon. We're recording this before the madness of the second day erupts here at the conference. And as you say, yesterday was focused on the developer community, and it was great to see because we had the R3 engineering team presenting. Corda is engineered out of London, so it was great to have lots of our own staff presenting and talking about what we're doing and what's coming. But probably certainly for me, and I think for many, more energizing was hearing people who were building on the platform talking to us and each other and the entire market about what they're doing, what they've discovered, and how they're building on top of it. So it was really energizing. And then today we moved to more of a business focus, with the people who are building are talking to us about the problems they're solving and the value they're getting from it. So it's a busy, stressful time, but really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, maybe to set the scene, you could start by just kind of describing the landscape, right? Because we're effectively talking about enterprise blockchain that's going to help probably individual companies, but even more perhaps industries start to leverage the efficiency that was kind of promised by this technology a handful of years ago, right? And there are a few different people, maybe Microsoft, maybe Consensus, maybe Ethereum, who are kind of pushing into the space with various solutions. Can you just set the scene? Like where are we, and what are people thinking about at the moment?
It's a really good question. So probably a good way to think about it is to set it in the context of blockchain more generally. So as we record this, it's getting towards the end of 2019. If we go back 10 years, or just slightly more than 10 years, it was November 2008, so almost exactly 11 years ago, that the very first email that mentioned Bitcoin was published. This email was sent to a somewhat obscure cryptography mailing list, and the code hadn't even been published at that point. It was an email announcing the project, and then a few months later, I think it was January 2009, so 10 and a half years ago, that the Bitcoin network went live. So that was, if you like, the starting gun. But we need to think back to Satoshi Nakamoto, he, she, they. That person, that group, they didn't invent Bitcoin and everything that came from it to solve problems that banks or modern day businesses have. Quite the reverse. This was like an
invented to solve the problem of banks, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was an anarchic, subversive project. But then something you could almost argue was quite strange happened around 2014, 2015. It became sort of generally believed, it was almost asserted, but without any evidence, that somehow, for some reason, the technologies underpinning things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, it was asserted that somehow these technologies would also be the savior of the banking system. It was the brand new, amazing technology that was going to transform business. And a lot of people were arguing for that. They were asserting it. But there was not really any, I could never really find any intellectual underpinning for why that might be the case. So I started thinking thinking quite a lot about this, and it wasn't just me, but I and others were writing about it, and ideas began to take shape. And at the same time, R3, our founder David Rutter, had noticed something similar and had been going around the world persuading some of the world's largest banks that to the extent there is anything of value in this technology, it's clearly about network effects, it's clearly about interactions between firms. This is highly distributed, decentralized technology. So why on earth were they all doing their individual projects internally? Why were they all doing their own proofs of concept, endlessly repeating the same experiments, often getting different results? Why didn't they somehow come together and collaborate on this? Now, of course, collaboration amongst fiercely competing firms is not in their DNA. But for anyone who's met him, our CEO has this almost like uncanny superpower to get people to come together and work together. So he was able to pull together what became the R3 consortium at the time, where we had this really quite special period in 2015 and 16, where we didn't have a mandate to build a technology. We didn't even have a mandate to solve any problems. It was to work together in this really quite frenetic and exciting sort of collaborative, international endeavor to just painstakingly go through the designs of these different technologies and different business problems and try and figure out what, if anything, we thought was unique or different, and how we might apply it to real problems. I can talk at length in a few minutes about what we discovered, but it was that sort of like that pause button pressed back then to try and put the belief that turned out to be true that this technology could be useful, to put that belief on a sound intellectual footing.
So it sounds like from what you're saying, R3 kind of came at this challenge from a place of industry engagement, consortium building. And I feel like there were maybe dozens of banks and large financial institutions who were participating and supportive of R3 early on. Corda is your product. And then other companies have kind of taken different approaches, some more developer-centric, some more, business-centric. How would you characterize the offerings on the market and how Corda is different from some of the other key enterprise blockchain solutions?
Yeah, probably the way to do that is to talk about, I guess, how we developed Corda and why we took the path we did, because it's very similar to some of the blockchain technologies, but it's also different in very important ways. So the work we did in 2015 and 16, the conclusion of that was we realized that the thing that seems to be like the new thing, or the thing that is now possible that previously wasn't, was that by looking at Bitcoin and Ethereum and these public networks, what they all had in common was this idea of computer software, software being run by different organizations that collaborated. The software collaborated to keep them in sync about facts they cared about, how many Bitcoins are there, who owns which Ethereum coins, and all the rest of it. These different computers around the world run by people who are competing, maybe even trying to sort of cheat each other, and yet the software keeps everybody in sync. It was almost as if it was a new way to build massively distributed systems where anybody who's using any one of them can look at theirs that they control and they trust and know that what it tells them is what everybody else is telling them. I know for sure that what I see is what they see. And the sort of like the segue that we or I guess the intellectual leap that we were able to make was, well, hang on, if I generalize that, if I had a system that allowed all the participants in a market, whether it's financial markets, but it could be healthcare, it could be oil and gas, it doesn't really matter. If you had a system that allowed all the participants in a market to know for sure that they were seeing the same thing about the facts, the deals, the loans, the trades, whatever it is they care about, perhaps we could reduce, in the first instance, a huge amount of inconsistency and duplication and all the things that go wrong when you have different systems that aren't in sync. Maybe we could begin to deliver this just like complete consistency across the market, and in so doing, create the opportunity for entirely new business models or entirely new things to be built on top of that down the line. The key point there was, of course, and it was quite a subtle point. That was a segue from a technology looking for a problem back into the problem domain, because I've just described a problem there, which is how would I build a system that would allow all the participants in a market to synchronize and be able to collaborate with complete certainty that they're all looking at the correct data. That's a problem statement, and that was where I think Corda was able to carve its own path, because we were able to say, well, if I've got that problem, how would I solve that? So it wasn't what some of our competitors inadvertently did, which was take an existing technology and then try and just shoehorn it and try try and apply it to business. We said, well, we've got this problem of how we bring everybody into sync at a market. How would I solve that? And immediately, as soon as you ask that question, you end up thinking, well, if I'm going to do that, what are some of the secondary requirements? Well, one, I need privacy. And it kind of seems obvious sitting here with you in 2019. But 5 years ago, that was not how blockchains worked. They worked on the basis that everybody saw everything. Everybody processed every transaction. Validation was done by people you didn't know somewhere on the internet. But in business, if you and I enter into a deal, why should 1,000 other people not only get to see it, but get to vote on whether it can happen? It was just ludicrous. So we began to write down these secondary requirements. Transactions should be between the participants in the deal and nobody else. If a transaction is confirmed, it needs to stay confirmed. That isn't how public blockchains work. There's a whole bunch of computer science reasons for that, but they have probabilistic finality. That doesn't work for business. So we worked through these things, and the end result was a set of requirements and ultimately a design and implementation of the platform we built called Corda that you can use to write an application that sort of like captures the essence of an entire market, a business process for how syndicated loans are syndicated or whatever it is, and then all the participants in that market can deploy it. And Corda will keep them in sync and make sure the data goes to just those who need it.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk at all about any of the live implementations of Corda, what people are actually using it to do right now?
Yeah, so I hinted at syndicated lending, and this is one that's is close to my heart because I've been working with the firm who are deploying it for some time now to understand this one, because I think it also talks to the problem, a good problem that enterprise blockchain can solve, because there are I'm sure as your listeners will know, there are a lot of inflated claims being made for the technology. But syndicated lending is almost like the quintessential example of a normal market. So the role of the borrower's bank in this market is not to lend the money; it's to find a collection, a syndicate of lenders who collectively will lend the money. And this is an inherently decentralized process because I, as the borrower, can go to one of many agent banks, as they're called. They'll act on my behalf to find the lenders, and then they in turn have got a book of thousands of lenders, pension funds, hedge funds, investors, all these people who might lend the money. So I can go to one of many banks. They can go to many of thousands of lenders. It's highly decentralized. There's no central point in that market. There's no one with a full view. There's no CEO of the syndicated lending market. And as a result, it has this really, I guess, strange but very common pattern, which is the firms within that market, the banks and the lenders, they've got very good IT. I mean, they may not think they have, but they have. They've got very good IT. They've spent the last 20, 30 years optimizing and improving themselves. They've installed systems. They've integrated them. The insides of each of these firms are well run, optimized. They've managed their costs down. They're well run businesses. But if you zoom out and look at the market as a whole, it's antiquated. Within the firms, it's nice and optimized, and between them, it's emails and faxes and telephones. It's like something out of the dark ages almost. And this is something we see in lots of markets. We're recording this in the City of London, right next to the insurance district, and it's the same there. You walk around like Leadenhall Market, and you just see the numbers of people with huge piles of paper under their arms. It's very hard to effect market level optimizations if there's no central point that can mandate it. And until a few years ago, the only real way to fix that was either not to fix it, which is the current situation for many markets, or to change the structure of the market by imposing some new central body to act as that central point of optimization, which kind of seems nuts. Why would you change the structure of a market to sort of like mold itself to the capabilities of the software? So if we go back to syndicated lending, the insight there was, well, hang on, you've got all these companies who are internally optimized. Many of them are using the software of a firm called Finastra. There's a piece of software called Loan IQ that manages these loans. And their insight was, well, hang on, what we need to do in the first instances is just link these systems together. If all the participants in a loan, the borrower, the lenders and so forth, could all see the same thing at the same time, all this error and inconsistency would go away. The market would just become more efficient. But the big insight, and this is why it's not just a computer network. It actually is being done with this consensus technology with Corda. Is once you get to the point where everybody sees the same thing about the loan, you can move to a point where this shared ledger becomes the authoritative record of who owns what, who's borrowed what, who owes what to whom. So you move from all these these records being distributed and unclear and out of sync to one where there's a global shared authoritative record, but without a new powerful entity having been put in place that now controls the market and can charge an unreasonable rent. And then the final part of their vision, because they're currently going live with phase 1. Phase 3, after they've done those first two phases, is then to say, well, once we've got these authoritative records, we can enable a new market for the buying and selling and trading of these loans. The end result being, of course, there's more trading opportunities for the banks. These firms they're doing this to make money. This is not a charitable endeavor. But of course, as these loans become more liquid, the interest rates can go down, and infrastructure projects, we're right next to Crossrail, for example. It will be cheaper for the next big project to borrow money because the people who are lending it will know there'll be liquidity for their loans, for their tranches later.
So that specific example, who was required from an industry standpoint to get the ball rolling, and how did R3 go about connecting with those people and aligning them toward making this change?
That's a great question, because the word aligning, so that word is doing so much work in that sentence, because it's hard. So we've seen many examples, and we learned a lot over the last few years. So we said you said at the start, R3 began as a consortium, but we're no longer a consortium. Now we're a software firm. Our business model is building Corda, helping people deploy it, and then earning revenue from those who buy the commercial distribution, the compatible commercial version. But because of what we learned building our own consortium, we've kind of now in our DNA got this almost like this understanding of how to help others get their projects live. And if I talk in the abstract first and then give a specific example, one of the key things we learned was if there's a group of firms trying to make a change at the market level, the projects we've seen that have struggled to move forward have typically been the ones where they've tried to do it entirely collaboratively with no one in the center, whether it's an individual, a firm, or a group, who will stand to benefit if it happens. It's obvious, of course, but there have to be incentives. People have to see that if they do this, if they go to this effort, if they make this effort, that there's something to be gained. So if we look at the projects that are really succeeding, and Lendercom, this syndicated lending example I talk about is a good one. All the participants, they gain something from it happening. So the agent banks gain from, obviously there's the efficiency argument, but they can also see the benefits of the secondary market that will emerge at the end. Lenders who are plugged into this can they can participate in more deals. The borrowers will get lower costs, and Finastra, as a for-profit software company, they're helping build this. They are building this, and they will earn revenue as well. So there's the incentives have to be aligned. Everybody will benefit from it happening, and therefore there's a groundswell of pressure and optimism to make it happen. Whereas there are some that are idealistic, or sometimes there are some quite naive ones where the idea is, I know we can eliminate evil middlemen or something, or we'll do something where there's where it's just done out of people's altruism, but that doesn't sustain you through a multi-year project to get something live. So.
Sure. You mentioned you guys started off as a consortium. What's the ownership of R3 currently?
So in terms of ownership, yes. So we did one of the world's largest Series A's in 2017, raised over $113 million, I think, and were held by a combination of founders and I think 40 plus investors, many of which were our original bank members, plus some strategics such as Intel and Temasek in Singapore.
What other, and no need to describe them at the same level of detail that you described the syndicated lending use case, but what other live implementations are there in the market? How are people using Corda today?
So maybe go to the other end of the spectrum. So I talked about a big heavy duty project such as Lendercom. Another one that was really pleasing for me, and I actually met the CEO of the startup behind it in our office on Tuesday, is a project run out of India that links. So it's a remittances project. The firm's called DigiLedge, that is linking expatriate workers from India in the Middle East back to their homes in India, and using Corda to synchronize the bank accounts and the information flow between the banks they're using to deposit their funds in various Middle Eastern countries and the banks back in India. And that's an interesting one for me, because it sort of explains to me how we think the evolution of this technology will be, because what the platform is being used for there is it's primarily information synchronization. It's making sure that the right people are told at the right time, and the coordination of funds between different bank accounts happens. But the money itself hasn't been tokenized. There's a lot of talk about digital cash and tokenized cash and cash on ledger. These are sort of like phrases that those in the blockchain community talk about a lot. But that's not what this project is doing. It might go there, but it's actually it's an information processing and synchronization project at the first time, and I think that's how a lot of these projects are getting started.
So that's what, to kind of help speed up the remittance process.
Yes.
As soon as the money's in a bank in one country, it can be unlocked in another country. Is that the concept?
Yes, exactly. So that's an example over there. There's another firm, Tradewind Market, and they've, in quotes, digitized gold. So they have I think a relationship with the Royal Canadian Mint, and then they're using Corda to tokenize gold and then allow that to be bought and sold, but settled instantly rather than very, very slowly. So it's just interesting seeing that there's big sort of like industry level initiatives such as Lendercom. And then another one is HQLAX, which is all about balance sheet optimization for European banks. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are these entrepreneurs, these startups who've independently discovered Corda. Our sales force didn't go and find them; they discovered it. And then the first thing we discover, because the base Corda platform is open source, is when they contact us saying, let us tell you what we've done, or they come to us and say, can we buy a support contract? Can we move to your commercial distribution? So it's quite exciting just hearing about these things that we didn't know about till they approached us.
Mm-hmm. So the revenue model is around, as you said, open sourcing the core protocol and then delivering value-add services in some sort of commercial and enterprise-ready, maintained specific instance of the software.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Maybe one interesting point on top of that is, because this is network software. This is software that all the participants in an industry or a process would deploy. They'll all be running a Corda app, as we call it, a Corda application on Corda, and we don't want to be in a situation where the participants fear lock-in, or they have to worry what would happen if we went evil, or what would happen if we disappeared. So we've worked very hard to make the free distribution, the open source version, make it both capable, so it works in production. This is not a toy, but it's also completely compatible with and interoperable with the commercial distribution. And our challenge that we set for ourselves is to make the commercial version faster, better supported, more features for people who need it for management, so that people choose to buy the commercial version because it's easier and makes their lives better, whilst knowing it's still compatible with the free version, mm-hmm. and that model seems to be working well.
Yeah. Do you ever plan to issue a public coin, and what are the pros and cons of doing so?
So it's an interesting one. I've been quite critical in public about some public blockchains and some of the implications of them, because there's a lot of belief that permissionlessness and permissionless coins are somehow desirable, and they're certainly interesting, and there's a huge sort of new economy that's spun up off the back of them. But for the problems we're solving in business, they need things like we talked about earlier. They need privacy. They need finality, and there's a fundamental incompatibility between finality and permissionlessness, and I've written a blog post about that I can share a link with. So the idea of a permissionless coin on a platform that's designed for finality and transactions for business, I just don't think the two things go together. There's a second point, which is every business I speak to, and we'll see this at the rest of the business day here at CordaCon, is when you ask them what do you do at the end of your business process, there's usually a settlement, some payment has to be made. Those payments are usually in dollars, pounds, and euros. They're not in Bitcoin or Ether. So that's what people want to be able to do. They want to be able to settle in the currencies that their accounts are in. That said, we did have a fun session yesterday where one of our senior engineers, Roger Willis, and it was a genuinely standing room only session. Even I couldn't get in to see it. He took people through at an architectural level how you could issue a coin on Corda. So we don't have any plans to, but as a bit of fun, he showed people how it could be done.
obviously there's a lot of debate in the space around this coin element. You wouldn't have written a blog post if it weren't relevant. Why was that session standing room only? I.e., what is the interest or the perceived value of being able to issue a public coin on Corda, or indeed any other enterprise blockchain platform?
So I have a theory. I think you see this with some of the not some of our competing platforms, because we compete in the enterprise space, but you only have to look at the you take out your phone and look at the price of Bitcoin or Ether or whatever it is. Over the last few years, there are a lot of people who've made and lost a significant amount of money by buying, investing in, or speculating in these assets. So I think there's always going to be a constituency who are driven by that. It can for certain personality types, I guess it could just be exciting thinking about money to be made, or the thrill of trading. But what do I get up in the morning thinking about? It how can I make Corda better to solve problems in the syndicated lending market and healthcare and oil and gas and insurance? And it's maybe it's less immediately exciting, but it's trying to do what, and I wrote a blog post about this a while back. It's trying to do for markets what the software industry did for individual firms over the last 20 or 30 years, which is just progressively, methodically, almost ruthlessly identify efficiencies, eliminate them, and in so doing, create new opportunities. Things like Bitcoin are what got us here. That showed us how you could build systems that solve these problems. But we're doing something different here, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no denying, it is exciting thinking about those things.
So this conversation is very clarifying for me around a few points. So a few years ago, there was all this talk about interoperability and how one of these big emerging themes was going to be, okay, great, so everything moves to blockchain. How do various blockchains talk to each other? Is there going to be one platform that everyone ends up using? Presumably not. So how do we make sure everything stitches together? Also, in terms of how you get an entire industry organized around solving a problem which is in the interest of everyone to solve, but often doesn't have immediate financial benefit for each specific member. And I think that you reference the work you guys are doing directly with another software company like Finastra, right? So, okay, here's some software that people are already using. Here's how we could work with them to enhance, effectively, extend the functionality in ways that create value for many different people in the space. That suggests, one, that Corda, rather R3, is an enterprise software company, probably not dissimilar if you look back over recent decades to other large enterprise software companies in terms of how they think about solutions, how they develop solutions, how they sell to market, what the revenue models are. So it's not actually as abstract as it felt a few years ago. Point two, that in terms of interoperability, I mean, I'm sure that's relevant, but it also sounds like with Corda, you're looking to address a specific type of use case, which is probably different than what some other enterprise blockchain platforms are looking to address. Maybe other people are looking to go, more of a, as you said, kind of coin-based route, whereas you guys are looking to fundamentally, at least to start, deal with more of the information structure and sharing around specific industry problems. Would you agree with my characterizations of R3 and the work you're doing?
I'd agree with it. I was nodding. I mean, your listeners won't have seen this because there's no video, but I was nodding along with everything you said until just at the end, where you characterized us as I guess, and maybe I'm being unfair now, but only focusing on the informational piece, and that it wasn't my intent to signal that. I was there are lots of people building on Corda where the first stage of what they're doing is information synchronization, and the whole what I see is what you see, but I did at least I did a piece of work in the summer that was I was going to say it was interesting. It was interesting to me, where I looked at what people were doing, and without exception, all the projects that were starting there had in their roadmap something far more transformational down the line, where either the reason for doing it or the end state involved actual transfer of value, so the representation of value on the ledger and the settlement and movement of value. So in the lending case, it was about sort of tranches of these loans being able to be traded more efficiently. Another example is the Swiss Stock Exchange 6 has a new subsidiary called the Swiss Digital Exchange, and they're building an entirely new exchange for digital assets on Corda, where the idea there is quite revolutionary. It's moving from a model where after a trade has been struck, it's settled in 2 or 3 days, to one where the act of the trade being executed is also the act of it being immediately settled, which moves to a much faster model, a very different, almost like a restructuring of that market. So as I was looking at these different projects over the summer, the thing that occurred to me was maybe this is why we're seeing as we are people moving to Corda from other platforms. It's because we provide these stepping stones. So you don't have to try and boil the ocean and solve the hardest problems first. You can do it progressively through multiple stages, because there's value you can get along the way. But apart from that, I think I'd agree with your characterization. You also talked about interoperability, something that we heard a lot about this a few years ago, where people were saying, well, how will Corda interoperate with Ethereum? Can Ethereum interoperate with Hyperledger Fabric and things like that? What we realized, and I think I upset some people when I wrote a blog post about this last year, I said, this is clearly that's important, but it's also, at some level, it's also premature and almost a bit nuts, because we've got people out there saying, they spend lots and lots of time proving and designing architectures for how Ethereum can talk to Fabric. When if you actually look at what lots of these projects are deploying, and I upset the Fabric team, for which I had to subsequently apologize. I was saying, this is ridiculous, because what I said was you had different deployments of the same platform that couldn't talk to themselves. So it's like, why are we asking if platform A can talk to platform B if two instances of platform A can't talk to each other? So we've done a lot of work on that on Corda. We have something called Corda Network, which is managed by a not-for-profit independent foundation out of the Netherlands, which is intended to be an openly governed sort of like open access network that any legal entity in the world, so any company in the world can join, and it's intended to have common standards, common rule book, common parameters for the network, so that these different business networks, so there's the lending network or the insurance network, they can all run in almost like on an internet of Corda nodes, and because they've got compatibility engineered in and they're in the same rule book, those networks can cross transact, they can interoperate with each other. So we've done a lot of work making sure that Corda networks can interact with each other, because if we can't solve that, then what right do we have thinking we could also get different platforms to interoperate?
So you mentioned there that phase one of a lot of these projects, and I appreciate you helping me get my thinking straight. Phase one of a lot of these projects was around information management and transfer. Phase 2, 3, 4 of a lot of these projects is around value transfer. Does that not bring us back to the point of the token on the platform? Is that required to support value transfer, or are there other ways to link the transfer of value to the platform without the need for a token?
Oh, that's a great way of putting it. So absolutely. So when I said, when you asked if there are, if there will be a public coin on Corda, we have no plans to have like a Corda coin or a free floating cryptocurrency. That's not what we're doing. But to achieve these ambitions for atomic instant settlement, you absolutely need representation of dollars and euros and pounds. So tokenized cash, tokenized real world assets, absolutely is in scope, and there's lots of work being done on that. So we recently released something we call the tokens toolkit, the token SDK, and that's a standardized, supported, documented way to issue representations of any real world asset, whether that's a cash deposit at a bank, whether it's an equity or a bond, be able to represent them on the platform in a way that can interoperate and different applications can use them. Because something that I think people miss is, let's imagine you could tokenize dollars. So there's US dollars issued by Bank of America, let's say, on the network. If they're only usable by one application, that kind of seems a bit pointless. You want it to be able to freely flow across the entire network. So we've been working hard on that. But we've also taken, if you like, a pre-step, which is that is not a prereq to being able to transfer value, because we already have value transfer systems. We've got payments networks. There's SWIFT in the UK. There's CHAPS and faster payments. There's different ways of moving value around. So we spent a lot of time on and this is an interoperability solution, something we call the Corda settler, which is a way to say within a Corda business process, now it's time to settle. And it always seemed a bit nuts to me that you could go to all this effort to build an automated business process for reconciling gas and oil contracts or whatever it is, and then just at the point you're ready to settle, you say, time to pay me, and then I pay you through your bank account. It doesn't arrive, and then we spend the next 3 days arguing about what happened. It seems ludicrous to try and optimize and engineer a process to get us into consensus, and then everything goes wrong when it comes to the payment. So as well as working hard to bring cash onto the ledger, we've also implemented this thing we call a settler, which is a way to say, let's eliminate any opportunity at all for ambiguity or error in the existing system by pre-agreeing everything. How much do I owe you? How is it going to be delivered? What will you accept as irrefutable proof that it happened? So that if I can then get that proof from my bank or your bank, you're not allowed to deny it happened because you've already committed that you will accept this proof. So even within the constraints of the existing banking system, how can we still get the benefits of, I know for sure that we both see the same thing and that there's no ambiguity. So there's a lot of work happening in that space.
Excellent. Well, look, it's been a pleasure to chat this all through with you. Richard Gendal Brown, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning into Rebank. If you like today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at Rebank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, fintech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.